Well, welcome everybody, and thank you very much for your interest in standing for local government. And by the end of today's session, you'll have a very good understanding of what's expected in the role and the requirements of standing for local government, and any questions that you might have been answered. Before we kick off, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which all of us are situated for today's discussion, and their elders past and present. I'll introduce myself. My name's Karen Legg, and I've been asked by Burwood Council to facilitate this discussion to support people who are considering running for local government to make an informed decision about their candidacy. Some quick housekeeping before we get started. Just a reminder that this session is being recorded and will be available on Council's website in due course, so that other people may refer to it, or you can go back and revisit some of the information if you wish to. At the conclusion of the session, you'll also receive a copy of all of the slides that we go through with the information and the notes attached to them. And we'll refer to that again at the end of the session. If you have questions along the way, please use the chat function as was just discussed with you. And if you could keep your microphones muted and your video off, it will help with the speed of this presentation as we go through. And then at the conclusion, when we have the open questions and further discussion with you as participants, then obviously we'll get you to turn on your mics at that point. I'll just quickly hand over to Burwood Council's General Manager, Mr. Tommaso Brasesi, and he will just give you a quick overview of the Burwood Council context and some of the key information that will help you to understand where Council is at the moment. So over to you, Tommaso.
Thanks, Karen, and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us on this very important day. Despite our dream was to obviously have you at Council, and unfortunately here we are again in our bedrooms and different offices. And I'd like to thank Karen. It was a pleasure when my guys and my team told me that we secured Karen to run this session, because she's one of the best in the business. So no doubt she'll be able to give us a great overview, but also answer questions, any questions you might have. I'd like to sort of mention two things tonight. One is congratulations for taking this important step. Choosing to run for public office is not an easy decision, and one that I respect. You have my full respect for it. And I'd like to get one bit, that is the competitive bit, out of the way before I talk about context. I think, let's face it, over the next few weeks, you'll be part of a race, a competitive process to get, I guess, a seat on our council. And it's a council that has only 7 spots. And so it's quite a competitive environment. And so I wish you luck for it. I'm not sure which party or which political group you are going to be running for or with, but nevertheless, I wish you all the best for the race. This, I was saying to Karen just moments ago, that this will be the 4th election that I personally experienced at Burwood Council, having started just on the cusp of the 2008 elections. And I must say that you know, my experience and our history has been one of a very, very clean campaigns, civilized, competitive, nevertheless, but without, I guess, the unnecessary pettiness that we might see in other areas of Sydney. So I'm hoping that we will see exactly the same this time around. But I guess the point I like to make is whether you will become a councillor at Burwood or not. I believe you've already taken a very important and big step towards taking an interest in community governance in how councils operate and understanding the essential role that we play in shaping our place in communities. And so I suppose regardless of what happens on election day, I hope you will continue to connect with me as of today, my team and council in our journey, towards the future of Burwood. And just, if I may spend a few minutes to talk about that journey, I'd like to, I guess, share my views on Burwood and a bit of context around our area. I might be telling you things you already know, but I think it's important that I share my views. Broad systems, obviously, geography. Burwood is a strategic centre in the context of global Sydney. We're positioned between the city and Parramatta. We have 3 stations and 1 metro station coming. So critical aspects from a geographical strategic point of view. Growth, we are a growth centre. Our population is growing. We've got targets set by the state governments, and we're obviously managing that in the best possible way. Growth presents challenges and opportunities, and we're not going to obviously have a discussion today, but I want to ensure that I clarify that our primary goal as an organisation is to build community. And how do we do that? Firstly is through awareness and engagement about who the community is, who is out there, our residents and business stakeholders. I'm not going to say anything new when I say that we have a highly multicultural community. All you need to do is walk around Burwood to understand that. But one bit of data that I always share with my teams, is that at the last census, the statistics about Burwood show that 32% of our residents had just arrived, not just in Burwood, but in the country in the previous 3 to 4 years. And so that presents a wonderful opportunity for us to discover who our residents are. So that means 1 in 3 of our residents, people that you meet on the streets of Burwood, have pretty much just arrived in the Australian system, if you like. So this requires meaningful engagement. It requires an outreach from council to understand communities' needs and aspirations, and it's something that we really are working hard for. The other aspect is place. So one of the jobs we have is obviously to do place management with all the aspects connected to it. But fundamentally, that means that we have a job in ensuring that there's livability. Now we're talking about lovability of the area. So for us, it's about creating a sense of pride. Those who choose to live in Burwood, and for those who have lived in Burwood for many years, it's about maintaining and discovering the sense of pride and belonging to our place. Another important aspect is demographics, is the age. We have a relatively young community in Burwood. Mostly our residents are in the 20 to 45-year-old bracket. And so a very tech-savvy community, and that shows in the very strong, we call it the digital community that we have. And as such, we engage across multiple platforms. For example, we were one of the first councils in the country to set up an official WeChat account for council, and our community there is growing week after week. If you have been around Burwood, you would see that we're quite a progressive council. We run a very ambitious program of capital works. We have important projects currently underway for our community. You might have seen our new library, a new community hub. We are finalising a new pool in Enfield. We have 2 new multi-purpose courts at Grant Park being built. We have new amenities in Henley Park. And these are just projects that we've been running in the last 1 to 2 years. So for a relatively small council, we run a very ambitious program of projects and initiatives for the community. We've also embarked on a program aimed at greening our city, and we've been planting 1,000 new trees. And you might have noticed around town that we are progressively replacing a lot of our hard surfaces with soft landscaping and planting. And really, these are just a few of the things we do. And so I suppose as you embark on this journey of discovery about local government, I would encourage you to not believe the old saying that councils are all about roads, rates, and rubbish. The 3 R's. You might have heard this before. We are much more than that. We at Burwood, I think at the last counts, we counted that we actually provide more than 100 different services. It's very hard to list them. I was trying before, but we're talking youth services, senior services, disability services, building inspections, health services, economic development, computer classes, English classes, migrant services, parks, playgrounds, fitness, pools. And then if you go at a higher level, of course, we're talking housing, strategic planning, heritage, traffic, parking, and so on. The pandemic, in fact, COVID was a great test, and just a good example of how essential our work is in our communities. You know, we continue to provide our services on the ground almost 24/7. We set up support relief programs for people in need, you know, for hygiene, food, packs. We activated a system to basically help homeless people find accommodation within 48 hours in partnership with state government, Wesley Mission. We created programs for kids at home. We set up a call system to check in with seniors and people that were alone in their homes during lockdowns. And we're doing the same again in these 2 weeks, hoping that it's limited to 2 weeks. And so that's a brief summary from me, and I'll probably leave it at that, but I hope you can sense the passion that I have for local government and for Burwood Council in particular. And I'd just like to conclude by saying that, you know, whatever happens with the elections, I hope and I encourage you to feel confident that we have a great organization that is passionate about one thing and one thing only, and that is providing the best possible service to our community, regardless of politics on council. We are employed as an organization to work for the community, and so I'll probably leave it at that. I hope in one way or another that I'll be able to meet with you personally, in person, at some stage, and to work with you on this future journey for Burwood. So thank you for having me, and I wish you all the best. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you so much, Tommaso, and I'm sure that, well, I hope that people will follow up your invitation and chat with you as they continue to pursue a consideration of running for council. So thank you very much. So I'm going to move now through the slide deck, and I'm just going to turn off my video because you don't need to be looking at me while we do that. Just bear with me. Right. I'm hoping that everyone can see the slides, and please use the chat function to let us know if you're experiencing any problems, and we will do what we can to ensure that everybody has a good experience and hears this information clearly. So to kick us off, I'll just give you a quick overview of what we'll be covering during this session. Tommaso's already given us something of an introduction or reminder about what's happening in the local government area from a council perspective. Then we'll be talking about the role of local government specifically, then considering what the roles and responsibilities are of elected representatives, and then considering that against the role of the general manager and the staff team. We'll have a look at the legislative framework for local government. There's quite a deal of legislation that imposes requirements and sets expectations for what happens within the local government context, and particularly for the governing body, the elected council. We'll talk about council decision making, some of the skills and attributes that would be helpful for you to bring to the role or to acquire as you're in the role, should you succeed in your candidacy. We'll discuss some of the challenges and rewards of public office and the support that's available to councillors who are elected to enable them to undertake their roles. For some reason, we have challenges and rewards twice on the slide. I apologise for that. And then we'll wrap up. There'll be an opportunity for you to ask some questions, and we'll finish by circulating a quick feedback form to get your thoughts about whether you've got out of today's session what you hoped when you registered for it. So let's kick off then with some information about the Burwood local government area. I'm sure you're all familiar with the geographic extent of the local government area, but this map helps to just confirm where the boundaries are. And you'll see that Inner West and Strathfield and Canada Bay councils are surrounding Burwood Council and take up some of the other suburbs that might be, just down the road from where you are, but are actually not part of the Burwood local government area. So in total, the local government area covers about 7.26 square kilometres and has a current estimated population of about 41,000 people. But the state government's projections, at least immediately before the COVID pandemic, and I guess we're still to see what the long-term effects of that might be, but the projections that the state government's demography unit had for the local government area were that over the next 20 years, the population could continue to grow to up to around 75,000. So a really significant increase from what's currently in place. And as Tommaso mentioned, that provides opportunities and challenges, and certainly accommodating a significantly higher proportion of people will mean an interesting approach to thinking about how housing development might occur, the density of housing, the types of housing mixes and that kind of thing. These are all the sorts of challenges that councils face in their long-term planning to ensure that those future needs are met as well as the needs of the current community. As Tommaso mentioned, there's more than 65% of residents in your local government area speak a language other than English at home. That's not to say that they don't also speak English, but that's a high level of community languages being spoken that, as we discussed earlier, need to be taken into consideration when community engagement is happening between council and the community, the way that we deliver services and so on. The state government has the Greater Sydney Commission, as I'm sure many of you are aware of, and that commission divides the Greater Sydney area into distinct districts, and Burwood Council sits within the Eastern City District, and there's a state government plan for the Eastern City District that has some specific objectives to achieve for the Burwood area. So some of the things that are recognised in that plan are that the dining and nighttime precinct that exists within Burwood, probably a bit quiet at the moment, but generally recognised to be a significant precinct for that nighttime economy, and the strategic centre for public transport investment that was mentioned earlier, but by your key location between the city of Sydney and the second Sydney city of Parramatta. There's a range of other Sydney and state government initiatives that have a bearing on the Burwood local government area. There was a mention before about increasing green spaces within the local area, and the Greater Sydney Green Grid is a state government initiative to connect up green spaces across the Sydney metropolitan area. And so the green spaces that are created in the Burwood area will contribute to that Greater Sydney Green Grid. As was mentioned, Burwood Council is comprised of 7 councillors, which includes a popularly elected mayor. And within council, there's an organisational structure that includes the general manager, who you've just met, and 5 directorates that sit to organise the organisation under the general manager. So the 5 directorates are currently community life, city assets, corporate services, people and performance, and city strategy. And so within those directorates, there's a key focus on the specific issues that part of the organisation will look after on behalf of council and to the community. Councillors and other people across the council also contribute to or sponsor a number of community, technical and industry committees, and council's website describes all of those committees, and the notes that you receive following this presentation will include a link to a lot of the different websites and resources that we discussed during this presentation. As with most organisations, council has a stated mission, which is to create a quality lifestyle for its citizens by promoting harmony and excellence in the delivery of council service. The way that council operates is shaped by some key corporate and community documents that set out the strategic direction for the community. That's referred to as the Community Strategic Plan, which is currently called the Burwood 2030 document. And from that Community Strategic Plan, council derives or creates a series of other documents that guide council to deliver its services and allocate its resources over the term of each incoming council. So following this local government election in September, a new delivery program and resourcing strategy will be developed in consultation with the incoming council to determine how best to continue to deliver services and allocate available resources to ensure that the community's objectives are met in the most efficient and effective way. In 2021, the budget of council showed an operating revenue of $57,049,934, with an operating expenditure of $54,291,800. Its capital works program for that same 2020-2021 period was valued at almost $16.4 million, and Tommaso talked through some of the capital works items that are being invested at the moment, the pools and so on. Councils also doesn't work alone in the area. There's a number of neighbouring councils that together form what's known as SSROC, or Southern Sydney Region of Councils. And that regional organisation is an important regional network of local government councils that help to shape and determine strategic direction for that part of Sydney. At the moment, Burwood is exceedingly active on the regional organisation of councils, with the mayor being the chair of that organisation as we speak. The regional organisation of councils takes a collaborative approach to addressing community issues such as waste management, street lighting improvements, renewable energy, and pest animal management. So those sorts of issues that extend beyond the borders of the local government area. So that gives you, along with Tomaso's introduction, a bit of an overview about the local government area that council is responsible for. So when we think about local government, it's important to remember that it sits in a broader government context. And so obviously we're all familiar with the federal and state layers of government as well. But there's very different and sometimes overlapping responsibilities across those levels or spheres of government. So the diagram on this slide gives us a bit of a sense of where those distinct responsibilities lie. But obviously there are occasions when local government might find itself being a very loud advocate for the local community to other levels of government. At other times, what's called cost shifting might occur, where a different sphere of government imposes upon local government responsibilities, sometimes with little notice and not much consultation, that the local government is then required to pick up and be responsible for. And so again, local government has that role of advocacy to push back on behalf of the local community to say that perhaps this isn't how we would like to invest our, rates and revenue. We want to concentrate on other matters that are important to our local community. There are constraints about, limits to what a local government council can make decisions about, given this, I suppose, layered approach of responsibilities across the three spheres of government. And so it's important that if you're considering running for local government and you're driven by a particular issue that's motivating you to want to stand for public office, that you're very clear about whether that is actually something that can be addressed or solved or in some way influenced at a local government level. It may be more appropriate to direct your attention to a different level of government if the issue is outside the realm of local government's responsibility. So it's just helpful to have a clarity about those different spheres of government and the different responsibilities that they have. We have a look a bit more closely then at the role of local government. Tomaso mentioned that there's about 100 different services, at least, that Burwood Council delivers in its community. And some, if not all of the ones described on this diagram here, may be included in that list of Burwood Council service delivery. However, not all councils deliver exactly the same thing. And so to find out exactly what your local council is delivering, then I would always point you to the current delivery program and operational plan, which can be found on council's website, which describes in detail the types of services and activities that council undertakes, and also in terms of the operational plan, the amount of budget that's being allocated to achieve those activities and services. So as I said, some councils will do more or less of some of these. In some communities, there'll be a range of other service providers who might pick up some of those functions, and in other communities, council may be the primary service provider in the absence of other organisations to pick up those responsibilities. So, as I said, refer to the Burwood Delivery Program and Operational Plan, and you'll see exactly what Burwood Council is delivering and its role in the local community. So what are the roles and responsibilities of the governing body? And the governing body in a council is the elected council, the 7 people who are elected to be Burwood Council. The role of the governing body and the responsibilities are described very clearly in the Local Government Act, which is one of the primary pieces of legislation which informs the local government environment. And the collective responsibility of the governing body as a whole sits beside the individual responsibilities of each councillor, and we'll discuss those in just a moment. Many of the responsibilities of the governing body are related to the development, implementation, monitoring and review of a suite of documents that we will refer to as the Integrated Planning and Reporting Framework that sits within the Local Government Act. And this Integrated Planning and Reporting Framework is a group of documents, plans and reports that you will become quite familiar with if you become part of the council. So a key important function of the council is to ensure that the organisation as a whole acts in accordance with those plans, programs, strategies and policies, and to determine a rating and revenue policy that optimally allocates the available resources to achieve the most sustainable outcomes for the community. Obviously, a key role of the elected body is to provide that civic leadership. Being elected to public office is a leadership role, and as a council, it's that community civic leadership that is a key role of the governing body. And it goes without saying that a primary responsibility is to act in accordance with the legislation, and we'll just discuss that a little bit more in detail as we go on. The more roles and responsibilities of the governing body are to review council's performance. And again, this is around ensuring that what was promised through the adopted plans and budget and so on is being delivered in the way that was expected, and ensuring that if there are deviations from that agreed direction, that decisions are made to adjust that direction in a way that's sustainable and still meets the community's expectations and needs. A very important function, you could say the most important function of the governing body, is to make decisions. And that sounds maybe a bit strange, but in fact, it's the primary thing that the elected governing body does in its legal function as a council, is to make decisions, to pass resolutions about what will happen in relation to a whole range of matters that will come before the council to make decisions about. The one staff member that the governing body has responsibility for appointing is the general manager, but in consultation with the general manager to determine the organisation structure. And that doesn't mean appointing the directors or senior executive staff, but determining the structure for which those senior roles will have responsibility. So I mentioned earlier in the discussion that the council has 5 key directorates. So the decision to organise council's activities under those 5 directorates would have been determined by the general manager and the governing body as the best way forward. The general manager then has responsibility and may delegate to others within other staff within the organisation for employing the people that sit within those roles and everybody else who comes within the staffing structure of the council. Another function of the governing body is to consult with the community and other key stakeholders, and the staff will be important, I suppose, informants to that process, where they will help to define the occasions during which community consultation will be necessary, the types of consultation that are required, the sorts of questions that consultation seeks to answer, and also the methodology that consultation will occur within in response to the needs of the community and stakeholders that are being consulted with. But the councillors will have a role in being part of those conversations and hearing from the community what the issues and needs and desires might be. Obviously, as we mentioned in the previous slide about acting in compliance with the law, there's a requirement that all elected officials act honestly and efficiently and appropriately. And in doing so, don't do anything that will bring council into disrepute. And it's very important to note that the council laws don't have an operational level function. It's very much a strategic governing body, board of directors, if you like, sort of function. The operational day-to-day decision making is made through the general manager and the staff, and the general manager will liaise with the governing body to ensure that the direction and activities of council's affairs are done in alignment with the strategic direction set by the governing body. So that was a summary of the governing body as a whole, the elected council as a whole. But there are responsibilities that the Local Government Act describes for individual councillors as well. So you remember I said there was a collective and an individual responsibility. So as individual councillors, there's a requirement to be active and to contribute. It's not enough just to turn up to a council meeting, but it's very necessary to have read all the business papers, to come in informed and ready to make decisions, and to actively contribute to debate and discussion that enables sound decision making to occur. The IPNR, Integrated Planning and Reporting, that I mentioned earlier, which is that suite of plans and reports that help to guide the direction of council, to determine the priority of resource allocation and so on. It's very important that individual councillors take responsibility to participate in the development of those documents. And there will be opportunities, particularly around the development of the delivery program and the resourcing strategy, which are the way that council commits to the activities that will be undertaken over the term of office of the council. There'll be opportunities to participate in those processes that it's very important that all councillors participate in actively. As an individual councillor, there are responsibilities about representing the collective interests of the community. So while you might be elected on a particular platform or for a particular, on behalf of a particular group of people who are your supporters, once you're elected, you're there to represent the entire community. And so while you may still have an interest in those specific issues that brought you to stand for public office, once you're on the council, it's necessary for you to consider the needs of the entire community and make decisions that are in the best interests of the whole community. A key function of council is to facilitate communication with the community. People often will stop councillors in the street or down in the supermarket and have a chat about the things that they're concerned about, because they recognise that a councillor is, their representative to the local government. And it's important then that the mechanisms that are in place, that are established by the council for council laws to feed back ideas, information, issues and complaints and compliments as well around the things that community members pass on to them. There's that facilitating that communication between the community and council is an important function of individual council laws. It's also an important responsibility of councillors to acquire and maintain the skills that are necessary for them to undertake the role. And we'll discuss later about the support that's available for councillors to do this, but it's also very important that council laws have some, insight into their own strengths and the areas that might require further development, so that they can actively define as part of their learning and development plan, the sorts of things that they'd like to build more skills in and or retain, develop further the skills that they might already have. And then the final point on this slide is around being accountable to the community for council's performance. Ultimately, we've referred to this notion of council being a board of directors, and just as a board of directors is accountable to its shareholders for the investments that shareholders make, so too is the elected council and individual councillors responsible for the sound investment of ratepayers' money, of other revenue that's received by council to ensure that the very best outcomes are achieved for the community, best value for money, and most efficient ways of delivering those services, to be accountable and transparent in the way decisions are made to achieve those outcomes. So I'm just going to spend a moment now to talk about the role of the general manager, because sometimes there's confusion about the difference between that strategic role of the councillor and the more operational functions of the general manager through to the staff of the organisation. And the Local Government Act generally refers to the general manager when it refers to staff generally, because it assumes that the general manager will have in place, a senior executive layer of support people and other staff under that who may be delegated with some of these functions. But ultimately, the buck stops with the general manager for the operational day-to-day management of the council. As we mentioned earlier, the council, one of the primary functions of the elected council is to make decisions. And so following each council meeting, when those decisions are made, the general manager then is responsible for implementing those decisions in a timely manner. The general manager is responsible for preparing, in consultation with the council, the community strategic plan, the community engagement strategy, resourcing strategy, delivery program, operational plan, and annual report, and other reports as required by the Local Government Act. The general manager is responsible for advising the elected council about the implementation of those plans and strategies and the policies of council, and ensuring that where it's appropriate and necessary, that the appropriate form of community engagement has been undertaken. The general manager has responsibility for ensuring that the mayor and councillors are given information that they need in a timely way that will inform their capacity to make decisions and support them to effectively discharge their functions as councillors. The local government and other acts provide for some functions of the council to be delegated to the general manager, and when council has made those delegations, then the general manager is required to exercise those functions. The general manager, as we mentioned earlier, is responsible for appointing staff in accordance with the organisational structure that's set with the council. That doesn't mean necessarily that Tommaso will recruit all of those staff, but will delegate to the appropriate people in the organisation to undertake that recruitment in order to meet the requirements of council within the resources that are available. And likewise, the general manager is responsible for directing the staff to do work in a particular way and ensure that the work undertaken by staff is in line with those agreed strategic directions and adopted delivery program and operational plan and resourcing strategy, and to dismiss staff if that's ever necessary. The council's workforce management strategy describes how council will best utilise its workforce to ensure that the optimum outcomes of the plans of council are achieved, and the general manager has responsibility for ensuring that that workforce strategy is implemented accordingly. And as I mentioned, there may be functions either delegated or required through the Local Government Act or other legislation that are imposed on the General Manager for delivering on behalf of council. So I've mentioned now the Local Government Act and other legislation on a few occasions, but that's because the Local Government Act and its companion local government regulation are very key documents in policy documents, the legal framework that really outlines and describes what local governments must do, how they must do it, the restrictions and constraints that apply, but also the opportunities that exist within that legal framework. But beyond the Local Government Act, there's a whole lot of other legislation, some which is very specifically targeted at local councils and others which capture local councils in their net, if you like. So a key piece of legislation that you're possibly familiar with, even if you didn't realise that this is what it was called, is the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, which essentially provides the legislative framework for all of those kind of town planning, development application kind of functions that council has responsibility for. Two other pieces of legislation which primarily are council documents are the Companion Animals Act and the Swimming Pools Act, which require councils to look after cats and dogs, registration and desexing and those kinds of things, in the sense of ensuring that there's not lots of roaming animals and that cats and dogs are managed in the community. And similarly with the Swimming Pools Act, it's to do with private swimming pools, backyard swimming pools that are in motels and other accommodation providers, and ensuring that they are safe and primarily preventing small children from coming to grief in those swimming pools. But other legislation that applies to a whole range of organisations and government agencies, and where local government also gets caught up, things like the GIPA Act, which you might have heard of. People still think of it as the Freedom of Information Act, but it's actually called the Government Information Public Access Act. There's obviously things like work health and safety, where we ensure that not just staff, but others who come into the environment are kept safe and healthy in that space. Disability Inclusion Act, Crown Land Management Act, the Roads Act, there's Privacy Act. There's a whole range of legislation that council needs to be aware of and comply with, often has reporting requirements associated with it, and that require councillors to have some kind of, I guess, oversight about the types of legislation that the organisation is obliged to comply with. That sort of state government and sometimes federal legislative framework that applies is then supplemented or complemented by council's own policy framework. And some of these are requirements set out in the Local Government Act, but others are just sensible governance issues that ensure that everybody approaches these questions with a consistent approach, and there are clear expectations about what is and isn't acceptable. So council policies include a code of conduct, which applies not just to councillors but to council staff as well, and often also applies to contractors and others who might work on behalf of council from time to time. There's a code of meeting practice, which is a key document for helping to shape the way that council meetings are held and conducted, so that they are effective and using the time well, that they're structured properly, that they're respectful, and so on. We mentioned earlier about the support that's available to councillors to support people in that role. And so the councillor expenses and facilities policy outlines the extent of that councillor support, the expenses that will be covered, and the facilities that will be provided. And it's one of the early tasks of an incoming council to review that policy and confirm it for the term of office of that council. There's another very important policy is the interaction between council officials policy. The Local Government Act is very clear that councillors don't have a right to direct council staff other than through the general manager. And so the interaction policy is really about, I guess, protecting staff from inappropriate requests that are not happening in the agreed way or through the correct channels. It's very important for consistency, for ensuring that decisions are in line with agreed decisions, direction is in line with agreed decisions, that the councillors' interaction is through the general manager, and the general manager passes on those decisions to the staff. So that policy outlines the requirements related to that. Obviously, in this day and age, we've seen lots of examples of people coming unstuck, particularly in the social media environment, by making comments in what they think is a private way, but becomes a public issue. And the fact of a person holding public office and making a private comment that becomes public becomes quite a messy place to be. And so the media and social media policies of council provide very clear guidance about the types of activities that councillors can undertake in social media when they can and can't speak on behalf of council, and the protocols that exist around that media interaction. There's also a conflicts of interest policy that is possibly self-explanatory, but it's very important that all of what councillors do, the decisions that they make, are very transparent, and that there's no possibility that people can imply that there was a conflict of interest in that decision, that people have benefited from a decision that they've made in a public role. And so that policy helps to make clear what is a conflict of interest and how to ensure that you stay safe in that space. Fraud and corruption prevention is an important governance issue in any organisation, but in a government organisation, I think perhaps there's an even higher expectation of behaviour and what is appropriate and fraudulent and corrupt, what that looks like, that sort of behaviour. And so this prevention policy, again, puts in place requirements that prevent fraud and corruption from occurring in the first place, but also provide a framework for managing incidents where there's concerns that fraud or corruption might have occurred. And the gifts and benefits policy, you would be surprised how often people would like to gift you something because they're very happy that a particular result has been achieved. But in public office, there are some risks associated with that. And, I'm sure we all remember the Premier of the day, Barry O'Farrell's gift of a bottle of wine that caused him to come unstuck. And so the gifts and benefits policy help to shape and determine what is an appropriate gift to receive, what must be declared, and what should absolutely be graciously refused. So all of these policies help councillors and staff to undertake their role in a very transparent, accountable and consistent way that complies with community expectations of what good governance and public office entails. As well as the policy framework that helps councillors and staff to be clear about their role. The council itself has a policy making function for the community, and those community policies exist in the same way to make very clear about the expectations for the community of using land or sharing community spaces, and how as a community we need to keep the environment clean and safe for everyone to use. And so community policies that council makes include all manner of things, and some of them are listed here on this slide, such as parking policies around where you might have paid parking or timed parking, disability parking, those kinds of things. I won't go through the whole list, but you can get a sense from that list about the breadth of areas that council has some responsibility for making policy about, and that policy framework assists staff in when they exercise their functions. If they're responding to a complaint about hoarding, or responding to a question about whether it's okay to have alcohol at a picnic in the local park, these policy frameworks provide guidance and consistency in providing that information to the community and taking action where necessary to ensure that community safety and amenity is retained through this policy framework. So as we mentioned earlier, one of the primary functions of the elected body is to make decisions. And the Code of Meeting Practice and Code of Conduct that I mentioned earlier provide a really sound basis for decision-making of the elected council. The Integrated Planning and Reporting Framework also sets the decision-making context for the council during its term in office. And very shortly after the election, the council will be briefed on where the community engagement activities to inform the next round of integrated planning and reporting are up to, what some of the emerging issues are, where some of the priorities that have been discussed over previous years that carry through. Essentially what the integrated planning and reporting framework sets out to do is to answer some 4 key questions. It's about where are we as a community now? Where are we as a council now? What does our budget look like now? Who are we, what sort of activities and services are we providing now? And where would we like that to be in the future, whether that's by the end of this council term, by the end of the next decade. It's about setting a bit of a strategic forward-looking aspiration, so that the decisions we make about how we will get from where we are now to where we want to be will be shaped to ensure that we meet those goals and aspirations. And so the integrated planning and reporting framework sets that out both at a community strategic level and at a council delivery program level, and then that's supported by an annual operational plan that describes the specific activities that will happen in that financial year to achieve those delivery program commitments and work towards those community strategic outcomes. So once that suite of plans is prepared and adopted by the incoming council ahead of July next year, then from the 1st of July, when that next suite of documents kicks off, then the decision making of council should be in relation to how the particular matter under consideration will achieve the things that have been committed to in those documents, and how it will fit within the resourcing allocations described within the budget and the resourcing strategy more broadly. And so the IPNR framework, integrated planning and reporting framework, becomes a really important set of documents to inform council decision making during its term in office. And as I've mentioned a couple of times now, the primary documents would be the delivery program, which is essentially the incoming council's commitment about what it will deliver over the term of its office, and the resourcing strategy, which describes how all of the revenue that council receives and the human resources that it has at its disposal and the assets and infrastructure that are available, how those will be employed to most appropriately meet those delivery program commitments. So important documents for everyone in council, but particularly the elected representatives, to be very familiar with and also to contribute to the development of, so that everybody's on the same page about, the way forward and how we're going to get there. All of these documents can be found on council's website, and when we distribute the slides following this session, you'll receive the notes that are attached to the slides and the links to each of the documents that we've been referring to. So what does it take to become a councillor? This list of skills and attributes has been compiled from interviews with people who have served as councillors in the past in a whole range of communities, whether they're metropolitan, hugely well-resourced councils or little tiny rural and remote councils. The skills and attributes that council laws require are pretty much consistent wherever those people might be meeting. And so some of them it's worth just having a little bit of a chat about now. Communication and listening are absolutely vital skills for anybody coming into this role. The requirement to listen to your peers, listen to the community, and then communicate what you're thinking and have that robust debate and discussion as part of the decision-making process are vital skills to have around the council table. And along with that are those skills of negotiation and problem solving and willingness to work as part of a team, because they're all part of that kind of communication and listening attribute. Having some patience, I think often people stand for public office with a really strong motivation to get a particular thing done. And that thing may well be able to be done over time, but it won't necessarily happen immediately. And nor may some other things that you feel passionately about. Maybe because when all is said and done, there are simply not enough resources for those things to occur. Maybe because they're not really a role of local government and they sit more appropriately with another level of government or a different type of service provider. Or maybe because across the community there isn't support for that particular thing, that other issues are given more priority. So patience is, again, something to bring to the table. In order to do the job well, being organised and having good time management skills will be important. There's particularly in terms of the amount of reading, business papers, reports and other information that's provided to help support decision making. Time management is a really important skill to enable that reading to happen, because there's some very important and high value decisions that could need to be made, and if they're being made without doing giving the decision due process by actually reading all the information that's been prepared to help support the decision making, then that's not okay. We've talked a bit already about that willingness to engage the community. Sometimes councillors tell me that they don't think that they need to have further discussions with the community because they've been elected to be the community's voice. And I guess to a degree that's a little bit true. However, we can never, no matter how many people voted for us, assume that we always know what those people will think about every item that's under consideration. And so there's an ongoing responsibility to have conversations with the community, to, to check in and check the pulse of the community. Are we on the right track? Is this still a priority? Are people still concerned about this matter? Do they have a preference about option A or option B that's under consideration? That we can't always know that 2 or 3 years down the track from the point at which we were elected. So that ongoing conversation with the community is really important. Which brings me to that next point about a commitment to social justice principles. And if you're unfamiliar with that term, what that means is ensuring that there's opportunities for people to have access and equitable opportunities to participate and rights to information to support their participation. So social justice really ensures that we don't leave anyone behind, that anyone in the community who needs access to a service or wants to participate in decision making, or there's equal opportunity for all of them to have that interaction with the service provision or the engagement activity or whatever it might be. Being a councillor is hard work. There'll be late nights, there'll be weekend work, there'll be lots of papers to read into the wee small hours of the night. And so energy and motivation are important attributes to bring to the role. And being a bit resilient, having some personal emotional resilience and some broad shoulders. Sometimes the decisions of council won't be popular, and regardless of how right you might know the decision to be, in the sense that you're privy to all of the information that's brought you to that decision, there'll still be some pushback or some flack in the media or some complaints from constituents, and that requires some broad shoulders, that capacity to not take things personally, to understand that this is feedback that people are entitled to give. However, it may feel personal, and so just going in with open eyes about that aspect of being in a public facing role. And that also, I guess, is linked to those attributes of confidence and assertiveness. It's important that councillors in their community engagement and other sort of public civic duty activities, can stand up in front of a crowd of people and maybe say a few words, or just be present in community events and other activities where there's a necessity to kind of assertively put the position that you've been asked to put on behalf of council, or to speak confidently in front of a group of perhaps complete strangers. Another key attribute is the ability to think strategically. We've mentioned several times during this presentation, and I'll probably say it again before the end, that the councillor role is a very strategic, high-level function, and it's not down in the weeds, as we sometimes say. It's not that operational day-to-day micromanagement. That's the staff's job. The councillors need to keep their gaze high. It's that helicopter view, the big picture. And so, having that strategic thinking capacity is actually quite a skill, and there are things that you can do to build that skill if it's something that you've not, had much practice with before. And then finally on this list is being empathic and also having some advocacy skills. So we talked earlier about listening. Listening is part of the role when we're talking about our constituents as well. And so often we'll hear stories from constituents that, require just quiet listening, being empathetic, and perhaps advocating for that person, whether it's about getting them housing or helping them to navigate a Centrelink process, or whatever it might be, or referring them to an appropriate service to get the support that they need. But that empathy and advocacy is an important skill to bring to the role. So what might some of the challenges then be of being a councillor? I've mentioned a couple of those in relation to the skill, and time is a very important thing to be mindful of. As I mentioned, there's a lot of reading to do. I don't know if you've seen a council business paper. They're all available on council's website, but they can run to hundreds of pages, and it's a lot of information to get through and have your head around in order to make an informed decision at the council meeting. As well as reading the business papers, there might be other preparation to do. There may be briefings to attend, community meetings to attend, and other just civic leadership roles that are outside the decision-making process. So community events where between the councillors, you'd sort of divvy up the things that you might go and put the council face to. So all of that takes time, and finding a balance between those council commitments and the rest of your life will take a little bit of working out. Sometimes a challenge is, as I mentioned earlier when I was talking about that resilience requirement, you will occasionally make unpopular or difficult decisions, and the decision might simply be to do nothing in the face of a request to do something. But however, that is still a difficult decision, and you are making that decision based on all of the evidence and the resources that are available. But nevertheless, it may be unpopular and difficult. And as a result, you may receive some negative feedback, as we've said before. And often you'll be asked to consider and think about and make decisions that are about things that aren't of particular interest to you. You might be standing as a councillor because you have a very strong interest in community service provision, and the next thing you know, you're being asked to make a decision about a road or a bridge. And, sometimes those things are less interesting to you. However, when you're part of the governing body, all of those things matter, and you need to have, make an informed decision about all of them. So that can be a challenge as well. As a councillor and close to your community, that level of government that is most close to the community it serves, people will approach you and want you to fix all manner of things, many of which won't be a local government responsibility. And so one of the challenges will be about, sort of carefully referring those people to the more appropriate place to have their needs met, or walking beside them in a figurative sense to help them to get those needs met. But you won't be able to fix everything, even though they might approach you with that thought. And then you'll have the challenge of balancing individual needs with community needs as a whole. And so you might have a number of individual constituents come to you with quite pressing concerns that sound very, important and worthy of your attention. However, when you balance those with the needs of the community as a whole, it may not be possible to address those individual needs in a way that's fair and equitable for others in the community, without setting some kind of precedent that will be difficult to follow. And so balancing those needs can be at times quite a challenge. And when you join council, if you're elected, you essentially join a group of people who might come from very different parts of the political or social or cultural spectrum have very different worldviews to you. And suddenly you're thrown together with these people and expected to work together collaboratively to make decisions together on behalf of the whole community. And again, that can be quite challenging if you're coming with a very strong view about something that is quite different from others around the table. It's important to remember as a councillor, unlike other levels of government, there isn't an opposition. The council is the government, and the opposition exists perhaps within the government rather than from a different part of, from a different side of the chamber. And so finding that balance, finding a way of working together with people who are, coming, as I said, from different worldviews will be an important thing to achieve early in your time as a councillor if you should become elected. And everybody who's been a councillor talks about the initial very steep learning curve, but that quite soon and incrementally over time, they become much more comfortable and confident in the role with the support that's provided by the General Manager and others within council, and that very sound, robust legislative and policy framework that makes it very clear what's expected and where the support can come from to assist in that learning. So be prepared for a steep learning curve, at least initially, but that quite soon you are very likely to feel much more comfortable in the role, and that everybody around you is probably experiencing a similar steep learning curve. But balanced against the challenges, there's also, of course, rewards. And the people who've been spoken to in the past about their experience of being a local government councillor say how important it is to feel that they're able to give something back to their community. They really value the opportunity to help to shape the local community's future through influencing the long-term vision and direction of the community, and finding new ways of utilising the skills and expertise that you individually and bringing those to this communal place of decision-making on behalf of the whole community. All of us, of course, bring quite unique perspectives to collaborative decision-making, and that's why we have this sort of democratic process of bringing people from across the community together to form the governing body. It's a great opportunity to learn new skills, including leadership skills and public speaking and advocacy, and not perhaps just to learn them, but to practice them and develop them further, even if it's something that you might have done in one way or another in your previous life. And a great reward is to make decisions that you can see are making a real difference in the local community and that are helping people to achieve those aspirations and goals that have been established, in the community strategic plan and elsewhere in the community. It's a great opportunity to work with diverse and passionate people, often people that you would otherwise perhaps not have very much to do with in your day-to-day life, on a whole range of issues, not just around the council table, but across the staff team and with community and other stakeholders that you may work with as you're undertaking this role. And it's also a great opportunity to show leadership and make decisions, that balancing the needs and priorities of the community and doing that successfully can be a really great reward of being a councillor. So as I mentioned earlier, you're not thrown in, if you're elected, you're not thrown into this new role in the deep end without some support for you to undertake the role. And very early, and we'll talk in a minute about some of the key dates, but very early in following the election, there'll be a formal induction process that will bring everybody onto the same page, new and returning councillors, to ensure that everyone has the same information about the expectations, some of which we've touched on tonight, but with a lot more detail about the information, or sorry, a lot more detailed information about those requirements and that policy and legislative framework that we've already discussed. And then, as I also mentioned earlier, there's an opportunity for ongoing learning and development. And part of what will happen fairly early on in your time as a councillor, should you be elected, is that with the General Manager, you'll develop a learning and development plan that will support your ongoing acquisition of new skills, opportunities to network with other councillors from other councils, local government conferences and seminars and things like that, that will be identified to help to support you in your role during your term in office. Local government is also, councillors in local government are also remunerated for their role, and the remuneration for local councillors is set by the Local Government Remuneration Tribunal, which is established by the state government. So it's an independent sort of separate body that determines the remuneration for councillors across the state. And the remuneration is a little bit different depending on the size of the council and whether it's a metropolitan or a rural regional council. But for the Burwood Council, which is classified as a small metropolitan council, the Remuneration Tribunal has set the rates for councillors to be a minimum of $9,370 per annum to a maximum of $20,690 per annum, with the mayor receiving an additional minimum $19,970 to a maximum of $45,110 per annum. And the actual rate within those parameters will be determined by council. I've already mentioned about the expenses and facilities policy, but there are a range of expenses that will be covered and facilities that will be provided that are articulated in that policy with limits to that expense established, which will, as I said, be reviewed and readopted by the incoming council early in its term. And so that some of the facilities will include things like, perhaps an electronic device or a mobile phone, access to an email address, or, expenses might include things like, a travel reimbursement if you have to attend something on behalf of council, those kinds of things. So essentially what it's saying is that you shouldn't be out of pocket for your for taking on this role, and that the expenses that you accrue as part of the role will more often than not be covered by that expenses and facilities policy. We've already mentioned that council has these codes of conduct, code of meeting practice, and a range of policies, which sound like this sort of big onerous group of documents that are there to scare us, but actually they provide a really supportive framework to help everybody in the organisation, councillors and staff alike, and indeed the public who we're there to serve, to be very clear about the expectations, as well as, what might happen if people don't comply with those policies and codes, what consequences there could be. So it's very clear to everybody, and that's quite, most councillors find it very supportive to know that there's a very clear statement about the expectations that exist. As we've already mentioned on a couple of occasions now, there's a suite of strategies and plans that councillors will participate in the development of, but which help, once they're adopted, become a really key strategic planning framework for which councillors will find a lot of support, because it helps to frame decision making and to be very clear about what the ultimate objective is of the activities and decisions that councillors undertake. And outside of the council context, there's an industry peak organisation called Local Government New South Wales, which exists primarily to support councillors to undertake their role, but also to be a voice for councillors to state government, for example, in helping to set policy that is more reflective of the needs of local government and so on. So again, another organisation that's there to support councillors in undertaking their role. As I mentioned, there's early on in the new council's life, the council election, as you no doubt aware, is on the 4th of September, and quite soon after, the following Monday week, there'll be a full day induction that will really allow councillors that are elected to hit the ground running. I really strongly recommend that if you're standing for election, that you put these dates in your diary now, so that you can plan around them, and then when your candidacy has been confirmed, or your election to Burwood Council has been confirmed, you can then take the steps you need to ensure that those dates are available to you. So in that same week, there'll be an extraordinary meeting of council where you will take the oath or affirmation. You'll elect the deputy mayor and determine which councillor will sit on which committees on behalf of council. And there's also some other legislative requirements, like deciding on the count back if a casual vacancy occurs on the council within a particular time frame. So that meeting is set for Wednesday, the 15th of September at 6 o'clock. And then not terribly long later, probably in the following week, and hopefully early in the following week, the second day of the induction will occur, and that will cover off in more detail some of the things that we've covered very briefly in today's discussion. And then the very first ordinary meeting of the new council, where the business of council will really, get going again, will be on Tuesday, the 28th of September. So, as I said, if you're standing for council, put these dates in your diaries now. And if you need to make arrangements around childcare or, taking time off work, have those conversations now, so that at short notice, if you discover that you were in fact elected, you're able to attend. There's an expectation that all councillors will attend the induction, and it's a requirement that you take the oath or affirmation at that first meeting. So it's imperative that you attend that very first extraordinary meeting of council. You can't undertake your councillor duties until that has occurred. So we're nearly at the conclusion of the presentation. There's a lot of information that's been prepared by a whole range of organisations to support people to make an informed decision about whether or not they'll stand for local government election. The New South Wales Office of Local Government, which is the state government's responsible department that looks after the local government portfolio, has on its website a whole range of information about becoming a local government candidate. The New South Wales Electoral Commission, I'm sure you've already had a look there, but if you haven't, I suggest that you make yourself very familiar with that very quickly, because there are a range of requirements for anybody standing for office that they meet pretty much from the moment you make the decision to stand. So any expenditure, if you're putting some flyers together and doing some printing, if somebody gives you a donation to help you to pay for the printing, all of that has to start being recorded and documented immediately. So make sure you're familiar with those requirements right now, if you're not already. I already mentioned that peak body, the Local Government New South Wales. It has a range of resources on its website to support elected representatives, but also some information about standing for local government. And of course, Burwood Council's own website has lots of information that will help you to understand the council context that you're putting your hand up for. Some of those very important policy and planning documents, annual reports that will give you a sense of where the council's, how it's performed over the last few years. And of course, there's information about standing for this local government election on that website as well. So, as we reach the end of the formal presentation, now is an opportunity, if there are questions that you came into the discussion with that haven't already been answered, to ask those using perhaps the chat function, or we can maybe move to talking to one another visually. I'm just trying to find here we go. I'm back. Michelle, have we received any questions through the chat?
No, we haven't yet.
Okay.
But if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask a question.
Okay, well, you're obviously more than welcome to ask questions via the email address that you registered for, and we can get back to you after the session with some answers if you think of something after this workshop is wrapped up. We really want this conversation that we've had tonight to be about helping you to make a very informed decision about whether you will stand for local government. We hope that it's given you enough information that you can have a conversation with your family and your friends and others who you might need to call on to support you to undertake the role if you were successful, so that you go in with open eyes and the people around you know what might be expected of them if you were to be successful and become a councillor. I've just got a downpour of rain on top of my head, so I hope you can still hear me. A tin roof not very far above me and a lot of rain. So before we finish, Michelle will circulate to everybody, if she hasn't already, a very quick...
I've just sent it.
Lovely, thank you. A very quick feedback form to all of you who've registered. We'd really appreciate if you could, it's just 4 quick questions, if you could just give us a quick amount of feedback about whether today's session has kind of met your needs, and any other feedback that you'd like to give us about the session, we'd really happily appreciate. Ideally, we'd get you to do that right now while you're thinking about it, but if you'd like to give it some more thought, by close of business tomorrow, we'll be shutting off that survey, and that will help us to understand how we can support future candidates, in future sessions. The information, as I've said earlier, the information in today's presentation, including some notes that will have a whole lot of additional information from what was on the screen that you saw, but also lots of website addresses and references to other resources that can help you to do some further reading. All of that will be sent to you shortly, and perhaps tomorrow morning, if not this evening, but soon. And I think that's all that I wanted to say. So perhaps I could maybe quickly hand over to Tommaso again, just to farewell you all, and we wish you well in your candidacy. But Tommaso.
Oh, thanks, Karen, and well done. Very, very intense, very comprehensive. There's a lot to take in, I guess. But as I mentioned before, I just want to wish all the best to those who are running for Burwood Council. So it's going to be a hell of a ride. Enjoy it, and hope to meet you in person over the coming weeks. So all the best.